Hi everyone, it's Anjanette Lene, back again with another video. Today I'm going to be talking about Ableton Simpler and Sampler instruments and how I use them to make sounds for some of my songs. Okay, so Ableton has these instruments called Simpler and Sampler. I'm going to go ahead and start with Simpler real quick because that's usually my go-to. Right now, I already have a session pulled up. To use Ableton Simpler or Sampler tools, you're going to go ahead and first open up a new MIDI track and go ahead and double click on either of the instruments. I'll be starting with Simpler. So what we're looking at here is a place to go ahead and drop a sample, because essentially we'd be using audio clips or audio files to drop in and then utilize them as some sounds that we can play on a MIDI controller. So I'm going to go ahead and just drop something in from Splice. Let's audition some of these sounds here. Let's do that. It's just a simple G chord, so I'm going to go ahead and just drop that in to the Simpler. And now that you dropped it in here, there's 3 different modes that we can use. There's the classic. So now that I've dropped in that sample, going into my controller, you can see that we could go ahead and play the sample as we would like. So the way that I utilize this is usually I go ahead and hit warp, because you can actually warp the sample clip within the Simpler itself, and kind of similar to how you would do it on just the regular, I guess, session view. It'll still give you the loop parameters that you could set. And if you're not already familiar with that, just to explain that a little bit more, is that Ableton puts markers in which a clip can play. So you have the ability to move that any of these markers around, but I'll go ahead and just leave it as it is. And with warping, of course, it's going to go ahead and stretch the sample clip to however long you want it to be, so that in terms of the timing, like right now I have it at 80 beats per minute, it should go ahead and just keep the original clip and just stretch it out so that it doesn't sound all crazy. To pick up where we left off, I just mentioned classic. So when you're in the classic mode on the Simpler, you can hold down the note for as long as you want the parameters for. And then switching into the next one over, which is one shot, it'll pretty much give us some different controls. So one shot, if you go ahead and hit any key or whatever pad on your controller, it'll go ahead and play out the entire sample. And then with slice, which is pretty much the last option you have, it's kind of similar to classic in a way, but it is setting up different parameters within that single sample. So if there are different parts of a sample that you would like to chop up, it'll make it just that much easier for you to hit any of these features. But it takes a little bit of programming to do, and again, you would just have to move the cursors. And then with slice, you can also change things by slicing it up by transients, doing it by beats or regions, and you can also set up the parameters manually as well. But in all honesty, I don't really use slice mode that much, so I'll go ahead and switch back to classic, and again just illustrate how you could pretty much play out all these sounds just by dragging and dropping that audio clip. And for the next part, I'll go ahead and drop in a sampler, and again it's the same process, just opening up a new MIDI track and putting in the instrument. And you know, just for demonstrative purposes, I'll go ahead and drop in that same chord I did on the Simpler. So, you know, I might get a lot of heat for this because I'm not necessarily a professional, and seeing as that sampler and Simpler to me are pretty much the same thing, except on the sampler, if you're actually trying to map out your sample to your MIDI controller, it's a little bit easier because you could see that the root note can be located just at the very first part of the screen. So if you're trying to tune any of your samples properly, it's a lot easier to do so. So in this sample, it's already a G chord. So if I go ahead and just change the root note on the sampler itself to G, let me go ahead and do that. If I find the G key on our MIDI controller, it should properly play it where it is. Versus in the Simpler, to do any of the tuning, you would have to go into the transients, or not transients, the transposition instead. So this is just a little bit more accurate in terms of, I don't know, music theory, I suppose. But essentially it kind of does the same thing. So again, just being able to play out any notes on the controller. But what's different about the sampler also is that there is no way to warp it within the actual instrument itself. So I don't personally use this one all too much, so in that sense I'm going to go ahead and stick to what I know with the Simpler and just pretty much show you guys how I'm going to use it in a track that I already kind of set up here. Alright, so I just dropped in a vocal chop in a Simpler. So this is what it sounds like on its own. Okay, so let's see what I can do here. That should sound weird. Alright, and that pretty much concludes today's video. And as always, thank you guys for watching. I'm actually going to go ahead and finish up this beat, so it's time for me to wrap up. Until next time.